The snow fell like angry spirits across the Arizona mountains that December morning in 1923. Joseph Running Bear pulled his worn coat tighter around his chest as he walked the frozen path toward town. His breath came out in white clouds, and his feet crunched through snow that reached his ankles. The Apache reservation had been hit hard by the worst winter anyone could remember. Joseph was 28 years old, with dark eyes that had seen too much hardship for his age. His wife Sarah was sick with fever back in their small cabin, and their 2 young children huddled around a fire that was running low on wood. The government supplies had stopped coming weeks ago, and the trading post in town was the only place left to find medicine and food. As he walked the 12-mile journey, Joseph thought about his grandfather's stories of the old days when Apache warriors moved freely across these lands. Now they were confined to the reservation, depending on government handouts that rarely came on time. The white officials in Washington seemed to forget that Apache families got hungry and sick, just like everyone else. The wind picked up as Joseph reached the outskirts of White River, the small frontier town that bordered their reservation. Most white folks there barely looked at Apache people, treating them like they were invisible or dangerous. Joseph had learned to keep his head down and speak only when spoken to. It was easier that way, even though it burned inside him like swallowed fire. He pushed open the heavy wooden door of Morrison's trading post, and the bell above it rang with a sharp sound. The warmth inside hit his face like a gentle slap, and he blinked as his eyes adjusted to the lamplight. Behind the counter stood old Pete Morrison, a gruff man with gray whiskers who had run this place for 15 years. "What do you want, Indian?" Pete's voice was cold as the wind outside. "You got money this time, or you just looking around?" Joseph reached into his pocket and pulled out the few coins he had saved from selling hand-carved wooden figures to travelers. "I need medicine for my wife. She has the fever that won't break. And some flour if you have it." Pete looked at the coins and snorted. "That's barely enough for a bottle of tonic. Flour costs extra, and I don't give credit to your kind." The word stung, but Joseph kept his face calm. He had dealt with this treatment many times before. "Please, sir. My wife is very sick. Maybe we can work something out." "Work something out?" Pete laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Last time one of you people promised to work off a debt, he disappeared for 3 months. I'm not running a charity here." Joseph felt his hands clench into fists, but he forced them to relax. Getting angry would only make things worse. He started to speak again when the door behind him opened with another ring of the bell. Cold air rushed in along with a man Joseph had never seen before. The stranger was tall and thin, with sandy brown hair under a worn cowboy hat. His clothes were simple but clean, and his boots were dusty from travel. He looked to be in his 30s with kind blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. What struck Joseph most was that the man didn't stare at him like he was something strange or dangerous. "Afternoon," the stranger said, nodding to both Joseph and Pete. His voice carried a slight accent that Joseph couldn't place. "Cold enough to freeze a man's thoughts out there." Pete's manner changed completely when he saw the white customer. His voice became friendly and welcoming. "Good afternoon, sir. What can I do for you today? We've got everything a traveler might need." The stranger looked around the store, then his eyes settled on Joseph. Something in that gaze was different from what Joseph usually saw in white men's faces. There was no fear, no disgust, no pity. Just simple human recognition, like one person seeing another. "I heard there's been some hard times around here with the weather," the stranger said. "Folks having trouble getting supplies and such." "Oh, the weather's been terrible," Pete agreed quickly. "Worst winter we've had in years. Of course, some folks handle it better than others." He glanced at Joseph with meaning. Joseph felt heat rise in his cheeks, but before he could respond, the stranger stepped closer to the counter. "I imagine it's hard on everyone, especially families with sick children or elderly folks. Man's got to do what he can to help his neighbors in times like these." There was something in the way he said it that made Pete's smile falter slightly. The stranger's words were polite, but there was steel underneath them. Joseph found himself studying this man more carefully, wondering what had brought him to this remote place in the middle of winter. "I'm looking for some supplies myself," the stranger continued, pulling out a leather wallet. "Medicine, food, warm blankets, things a family might need to get through a bad spell." He paused and looked directly at Joseph. "Seems like this gentleman here might know what kind of supplies work best in this climate." Joseph was surprised to be included in the conversation. Most white men talked about Apache people like they weren't even in the room. Yes, sir, he said carefully. The fever medicine works better if you mix it with willow bark tea, and cornmeal lasts longer than wheat flour when you're stretching supplies. The stranger nodded like Joseph had said something wise and important. That's good to know. A man learns something new every day if he keeps his ears open. He turned back to Pete. I'll take whatever medicine you recommend, plus enough cornmeal and other supplies for a family of 4 for about 2 weeks. Pete's eyes lit up at the prospect of such a large sale. He began gathering items from around the store, chattering about prices and quality. But Joseph noticed the stranger kept glancing at him like he was thinking about something. As Pete wrapped up the purchases, the stranger asked quietly, "You live far from here?" "About 12 miles, Joseph answered. "On the reservation?" "That's a long walk in this weather, especially carrying supplies." The stranger seemed to be considering something. "I've got a wagon outside. Room for a passenger if you're headed that way." Joseph stared at him in surprise. White men didn't offer rides to Apache people. They barely spoke to them unless they had to. "That's very kind, sir, but I couldn't impose." The stranger smiled, and it reached all the way to his eyes. "No imposition. I'm headed that direction anyway, and the company would be welcome. Gets lonely traveling alone in winter." For the first time in months, Joseph felt something loosen in his chest. Maybe this stranger was different from the others. Maybe there was still kindness left in the world, even in the dead of winter. The stranger's wagon was sturdy and well-built, with 2 strong horses that seemed unbothered by the cold. As they loaded the supplies into the back, Joseph learned that the man's name was Thomas Mitchell, and he was a traveling preacher from Colorado. This surprised Joseph, because most preachers he had met treated Apache people like they needed to be saved from themselves. "I've been traveling through these territories for about 5 years now," Thomas explained as they climbed onto the wagon seat. "Trying to help where I can, learn from folks I meet. You'd be amazed how much wisdom there is in small places if you take time to listen." The horses' hooves crunched through the snow as they left town, and Joseph found himself relaxing slightly. Thomas didn't pepper him with questions about Apache customs or make uncomfortable comments about civilization and savagery. Instead, he talked about the weather, the landscape, and the challenges of travel in winter. "Your wife," Thomas said after they had ridden in comfortable silence for a while. "How long has she been sick?" 3 weeks now, Joseph replied. "The fever comes and goes, but she's getting weaker. Our medicine woman did what she could, but this sickness is different, stronger." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "I've seen that kind of fever in other places. Sometimes the old remedies work best, sometimes the new ones. Often it's a combination that does the trick." He glanced at Joseph. "Your medicine woman, she's tried willow bark and sage." Joseph was surprised that a white preacher knew about traditional Apache remedies. "Yes, and other things too. But nothing seems to break the fever completely. The medicine from the trading post might help, but she'll need to stay warm and drink plenty of fluids. Sometimes these fevers just have to run their course, but you can make the person more comfortable while they fight it off." As they traveled deeper into the reservation lands, Joseph began to see his home through Thomas's eyes. The stranger looked around with genuine interest, not the mixture of pity and disgust that most white visitors showed. He asked respectful questions about the plants they passed and listened carefully to Joseph's answers. "That's desert sage," Joseph explained, pointing to a snow-covered bush. "We use it for cleansing ceremonies and medicine. And those tracks there belong to a fox family that lives in the rocks up ahead." "You know this land well," Thomas observed. "Your people have been here a long time." "Our ancestors lived here for hundreds of years before the white settlers came," Joseph said, then immediately wondered if he had spoken too freely. But Thomas just nodded. A man's roots go deep when his family has walked the same ground for generations. That's something to be respected. They were about halfway to Joseph's cabin when they came upon another traveler struggling through the snow. It was an elderly Apache man named Samuel White Crow, who lived alone in a small hut near the river. He was trying to pull a makeshift sled loaded with firewood, but the snow was too deep and the sled kept getting stuck. "Samuel," Joseph called out, and Thomas pulled the wagon to a stop. "What are you doing out here in this weather?" The old man looked up, his weathered face creased with exhaustion. "Joseph, my boy, my firewood ran out yesterday and the cold is getting into my bones. I thought I could gather enough to last a few more days." Thomas was already climbing down from the wagon. "Sir, you look like you could use some help. Why don't we load that wood into the wagon and give you a ride home?" Samuel looked suspicious at first, eyeing Thomas warily. Apache elders had good reason to be cautious around white strangers. But Joseph nodded encouragingly, and something in Thomas's manner seemed to put the old man at ease. "That's very kind of you, young man," Samuel said, "but I don't want to be a burden." "No burden at all," Thomas replied, already helping to load the firewood. "Besides, it's too cold for anyone to be walking alone out here." As they helped Samuel into the wagon, Joseph noticed that Thomas treated the elderly Apache man with the same respect he would show any elder. He made sure Samuel was comfortable and wrapped a spare blanket around his shoulders without making a big show of it. Samuel's hut was a simple structure made of wood and adobe, but it was clean and well maintained. Thomas helped carry the firewood inside, and even took a few minutes to help Samuel get a good fire started in the small stone fireplace. "You live here alone?" Thomas asked as he arranged the logs. "My wife passed 2 winters ago," Samuel explained. "My children moved to other reservations when they married. It gets quiet sometimes, but this is my home." Thomas nodded, understanding. A man needs his own place, especially somewhere that holds memories of the people he's loved. Before they left, Thomas insisted on leaving some of his own supplies with Samuel, including food and an extra blanket. The old man protested, but Thomas waved off his concerns. "I've got more than I need, and winter's not over yet. Besides, I have a feeling you've helped plenty of people in your time, just passing along the kindness." As they drove away from Samuel's hut, Joseph found himself studying Thomas more carefully. This was not like any white man he had ever met. There was no condescension in his manner, no sense that he was doing charity work among the unfortunate heathens. He treated Joseph and Samuel like they were simply people who deserved respect and help when they needed it. "You're different from most preachers I've met," Joseph said finally. Thomas smiled. "How so?" "Most of them want to save our souls and change our ways. They tell us our traditions are wrong, and that we need to become like white people to be good Christians." "Well," Thomas said thoughtfully, "I figure the Creator made all kinds of people for a reason. My job isn't to make everyone the same, but to help where I can and learn what I can. I've found that most folks, regardless of their color or customs, just want to take care of their families and live in peace." Joseph felt something shift inside him, like ice beginning to crack on a warm day. For the first time in years, he was talking to a white man as an equal, not as someone who needed to prove his worth or apologize for his existence. "What brought you to this part of the territory?" Joseph asked. "I heard there were people struggling through a hard winter. Figured I might be able to help somehow, even if it was just listening to folks' troubles or sharing what supplies I could spare." "And you just came, without being asked?" Thomas shrugged. "Sometimes people are too proud to ask for help even when they need it. I've learned that showing up is often more important than waiting to be invited." The snow continued to fall around them as they traveled toward Joseph's cabin, but the cold seemed less bitter now. Joseph found himself hoping that Sarah would be awake when they arrived, because he wanted her to meet this unusual stranger who had appeared like an answer to a prayer they hadn't dared to pray. When they reached Joseph's cabin, the small structure looked even more humble than usual against the backdrop of snow-covered mountains. Smoke drifted from the chimney, which was a good sign that the fire was still burning. Joseph's heart quickened as he thought about Sarah inside, hopefully getting better with the medicine he would soon bring her. Thomas helped unload the supplies without being asked, carrying the heavy bags like they weighed nothing. As they approached the door, it opened and a small face peeked out. Little Mary, Joseph's 6-year-old daughter, looked at the stranger with wide, curious eyes. "Papa," she called, then disappeared back inside. "Papa's home, and he brought someone." Joseph pushed open the door and stepped into the warm cabin, followed by Thomas. The interior was simple but clean, with handmade furniture and colorful woven blankets that Sarah had made before she got sick. In one corner, 8-year-old Daniel sat carving a piece of wood with intense concentration, while Mary hovered near a curtained alcove where Sarah lay resting. "Joseph," came a weak voice from behind the curtain. "Is that you?" "Yes, it's me," Joseph replied, moving quickly to his wife's side. He pushed aside the curtain to reveal Sarah lying on a simple bed, her face flushed with fever but her eyes alert. Even sick, she was beautiful, with long black hair and gentle features that reminded Joseph why he had fallen in love with her 10 years ago. "I brought medicine," he said softly, touching her forehead. It was still too warm, but not as burning hot as it had been that morning. And we have a visitor, a man who helped me bring supplies from town. Sarah tried to sit up, but Joseph gently pressed her back down. Don't worry about getting up. You need to rest. But we have a guest, she protested weakly. It's not proper. Thomas appeared at Joseph's shoulder, having heard the conversation. Ma'am, please don't trouble yourself on my account. I'm just here to help if I can. Your husband tells me you've been fighting this fever for a while now. Sarah looked at Thomas with surprise, not just because he was white, but because his voice held genuine concern, rather than the awkward politeness most white people used when they had to interact with Apache families. It comes and goes, she said quietly. Some days I feel better, then it returns stronger than before. Thomas nodded knowingly. I've seen that pattern before, may I? He gestured toward a chair near the bed, and Sarah nodded permission. Thomas sat down and leaned forward slightly, his manner professional but kind. I'm not a doctor, he said, but I've helped care for sick folks in many places. Sometimes it helps to have another person look at the situation with fresh eyes. He asked Sarah gentle questions about her symptoms, when the fever was worst, what she had been able to eat, and how much she had been sleeping. His questions were intelligent and showed he understood sickness better than most people Joseph had met. Meanwhile, Mary and Daniel had crept closer to listen. They were naturally curious about this stranger who spoke to their parents like they were important people, worthy of respect. Thomas noticed them watching and smiled. You must be Mary and Daniel, he said. Your father told me about you on the way here. He said you've been taking good care of your mother while she's been sick. Both children beamed at the praise. Mary stepped forward boldly. I help Mama drink water and Daniel chops wood for the fire. That's very important work, Thomas said seriously. A family has to work together when times are hard. While they talked, Joseph mixed the medicine from the trading post with warm water, following the directions Thomas had suggested. Sarah drank it without complaint, though her face showed it tasted terrible. Now, Thomas said, standing up from the chair, the best thing for that medicine to work is for you to stay warm and rest. But I bet it's hard to rest when you're worried about your family having enough food and firewood. I try not to worry, Sarah said, but her eyes showed she did worry constantly. Well, let's take away some of those worries then. Thomas turned to Joseph. I noticed your wood pile is getting low, and with this snow it's going to be hard to gather more dry wood. Why don't we work on that problem first? Joseph was about to protest that he couldn't accept so much help from a stranger, but Thomas was already heading for the door. Daniel, you want to show me where the good firewood is around here? I bet you know all the best spots. Daniel's face lit up at being treated like an expert. He grabbed his coat and followed Thomas outside, chattering about which trees made the best burning wood and where to find branches that stayed dry even in snow. For the next 2 hours, Thomas and Daniel worked together to gather and split firewood. Joseph joined them, amazed at how naturally Thomas worked alongside them. The preacher was strong and skilled with an axe, but he never made Joseph or Daniel feel like they weren't pulling their weight. More importantly, Thomas seemed genuinely interested in Daniel's knowledge of the forest. He asked questions about animal tracks they saw, listened carefully when Daniel explained which plants the deer liked to eat, and praised the boy's ability to spot dry wood under the snow. Your son knows this land well, Thomas told Joseph as they stacked the last of the wood near the cabin. That's valuable knowledge. A man who understands his environment can always find a way to survive. Inside the cabin, Mary had appointed herself Thomas's hostess. She showed him her doll made from corn husks and explained the patterns in her mother's weaving. Thomas listened to her chatter with the same attention he gave to adult conversations, asking questions that made Mary feel important and heard. When Sarah felt strong enough to sit up for a while, Thomas helped Joseph prepare a hearty soup using some of the supplies they had brought from town. He worked comfortably in the small kitchen area, clearly experienced at cooking for himself during his travels. You cook like a man who's been taking care of himself for a long time, Sarah observed, speaking more than she had in days. I've been traveling alone for several years now, Thomas replied, stirring the pot. A man learns to do for himself, though I admit it's nicer to cook for a family. Makes the food taste better somehow. As evening approached, Joseph faced an awkward situation. Custom demanded that he offer hospitality to their guest, but the cabin was small and they had little to spare. Before he could figure out how to phrase the invitation without seeming presumptuous, Thomas solved the problem himself. "I've got a good bedroll and tent in my wagon," he said. "If you don't mind, I'd like to camp nearby tonight. The snow's supposed to stop, and I want to check on Mrs. Running Bear's fever in the morning before I continue my travels." Joseph felt relief flood through him. Thomas had found a way to stay and help without putting strain on the family's limited resources or making anyone feel awkward about the arrangement. "You're welcome to camp here," Joseph said, "and thank you for everything today." Thomas waved off the thanks. Neighbors help neighbors. That's just the way things should be. As Thomas set up his camp near the cabin, Joseph realized that something fundamental had changed in his understanding of white people. Not all of them were enemies or indifferent strangers. Some of them, apparently, were just people trying to do good in a difficult world. For the first time in months, Joseph went to sleep feeling hopeful about the future. Joseph woke before dawn to the sound of someone chopping wood outside. For a moment he was confused, then remembered their unusual guest. He dressed quietly and stepped outside to find Thomas already at work, splitting logs by lamplight in the pre-dawn darkness. "Morning," Thomas said cheerfully, as if getting up before sunrise to chop wood for strangers was the most natural thing in the world. "How's your wife feeling?" Joseph checked on Sarah and found her fever had broken during the night. For the first time in weeks, her forehead felt cool to the touch, and she was sleeping peacefully without the restless tossing that had worried him so much. "The fever's gone," Joseph reported, unable to keep the relief out of his voice. "She's sleeping normally now," Thomas smiled widely. "That's wonderful news. Sometimes these fevers just need the right medicine and enough rest to break. She'll probably be weak for a few days, but the worst is over." As the sun rose, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold, the two men worked together to complete the morning chores. Thomas seemed to understand instinctively what needed to be done, helping with tasks that would have taken Joseph hours to complete alone. When Sarah woke up, she was weak but clearly on the mend. She was able to sit up and eat some breakfast, and for the first time in days she smiled at her children's antics. Mary and Daniel were delighted to have their mother feeling better, and they chattered excitedly about all the things they wanted to show her when she was completely well. "I should probably head into town today," Thomas said as they finished breakfast. "There are other families that might need help, and I want to check on old Samuel before I leave this area." Joseph felt disappointed that their new friend would be leaving so soon, but he understood. Thomas was a traveling preacher with responsibilities to many people, not just their family. "Before you go," Sarah said quietly, "I want to thank you properly. You came to us like an answer to prayer, and you've shown our family kindness that we won't forget." Thomas looked uncomfortable with the formal thanks. "Anyone would have done the same thing." "No," Joseph said firmly. "Not anyone. Most white people in these parts wouldn't have given us a second glance, let alone shared their supplies and worked to help us." "Well," Thomas said, "maybe it's time for that to change. Maybe people just need to get to know each other better." As Thomas prepared to leave, Daniel approached him shyly. "Mr. Thomas, will you come back sometime? I want to show you the place where the eagles nest when the weather gets warm." Thomas knelt down to the boy's level. "I'd like that very much, Daniel. I'll try to come back through this way in the spring and you can show me those eagles." Mary, not to be outdone, ran to get something from the corner of the cabin. She returned with a small carved wooden horse that Joseph had made for her the previous Christmas. "This is for you," she said, pressing it into Thomas's hands, "so you remember us when you're traveling." Thomas's eyes grew suspiciously bright as he accepted the gift. "This is beautiful, Mary. I'll treasure it and I'll think of you and your family every time I look at it." Before leaving, Thomas made one more gesture that surprised everyone. He asked Joseph if he would be willing to meet with some of the other Apache families in the area to talk about their needs during the remaining winter months. "I'd like to organize some help," Thomas explained. "Get supplies to the families that need them most, maybe arrange for a doctor to visit the reservation. But I need someone who knows the community and who people trust to help me understand what's needed most." Joseph was amazed by the suggestion. No white person had ever asked for his help in organizing assistance for his people. Usually, white officials made decisions about Apache needs without consulting any Apache people at all. "I'd be honored to help," Joseph said. "There are several families with elderly members who are struggling, and some children who don't have warm enough clothes for this weather." "Good. I'll be back in a week with more supplies and hopefully a doctor. Can you spread the word and find out what each family needs most? As Thomas climbed onto his wagon and prepared to leave, Joseph realized that their chance encounter had changed something fundamental in his view of the world. For years he had seen white people and Apache people as two separate groups that could never really understand each other. But Thomas had shown him that understanding was possible when people approached each other with genuine respect and compassion. One more thing, Thomas said before driving away. That carving work your husband does is really fine craftsmanship. There are people in Denver and other cities who would pay good money for authentic Apache artwork. Maybe we can talk about that when I come back. Sarah squeezed Joseph's hand as they watched the wagon disappear into the distance. He's going to try to help us sell your carvings? I think so, Joseph replied, still hardly believing it. For years he had sold his wooden figures to occasional travelers for barely enough money to buy basic supplies. The idea that his work might be valued enough to provide real income for his family seemed too good to be true. Over the next week, Joseph visited every family on the reservation, carefully noting their needs and resources. He was surprised to discover how much he had learned from watching Thomas work. The preacher's approach of listening first and asking respectful questions had shown Joseph a new way to interact with his own community members. Old Samuel White Crow was particularly pleased to hear about the planned help. That white preacher, he's different from the others, Samuel said. He looked at me like I was a person worth knowing, not just a problem to be solved. Joseph found that many families had stories similar to his own. They had been struggling through the harsh winter with little help from government officials, making do with whatever resources they could find or create. But none of them had expected help from a white stranger, and the news that someone cared enough to organize assistance lifted spirits throughout the community. When Joseph's neighbor Robert Two Hawks heard about Thomas's plan to help sell Apache artwork, he brought out several beautiful pottery pieces his wife had made. Do you think this white man was serious about finding buyers for our work? He asked. I think he was, Joseph replied. He seemed to mean everything he said. As the week passed, Sarah grew stronger each day. The medicine had worked, but Joseph suspected that Thomas's kindness had been just as healing. For the first time in months, Sarah talked about plans for the future, about teaching Mary to weave and helping Daniel learn more advanced carving techniques. You know what I keep thinking about? She said one evening as they sat by the fire. How different things might be if more white people were like Thomas. Not trying to change us or save us, but just treating us like people they could learn from and work with. Joseph nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Thomas had shown them a different possibility for how Apache and white communities might relate to each other, not as superior and inferior, but as neighbors who could help each other survive and thrive in a difficult world. When the day came for Thomas to return, the entire Running Bear family waited eagerly for the sound of wagon wheels on the snowy path. They had no way of knowing that his visit would mark the beginning of changes that would affect their community for years to come. Thomas returned exactly when he promised, but this time he wasn't alone. Behind his familiar wagon came two more wagons loaded with supplies, and riding alongside was a middle-aged man with a medical bag who introduced himself as Dr. William Hayes from Flagstaff. Dr. Hayes heard about the situation here and volunteered to make the trip, Thomas explained as they unloaded the wagons near the small building that served as the reservation's community center. He's brought medicine and wants to examine anyone who's been sick or injured. Joseph was amazed at the quantity of supplies Thomas had managed to gather. There were warm blankets, canned food, flour, sugar, coffee, and even some bolts of fabric that the women could use to make clothes for their children. More importantly, Dr. Hayes had brought modern medicines that could treat the lingering coughs and fevers that had plagued several families throughout the winter. Word spread quickly through the reservation, and soon families began arriving at the community center. Joseph was struck by how differently people behaved around Thomas compared to other white visitors. Instead of the guarded politeness they usually showed, Apache families greeted Thomas like a friend returning home. Mr. Mitchell, called out Robert Two Hawks carrying a carefully wrapped pottery piece. I brought some of my wife's work to show you. Thomas examined the pottery with genuine appreciation, turning it carefully in his hands and asking intelligent questions about the techniques used to create the intricate designs. This is museum-quality work, he said finally. I know gallery owners in Denver who would be very interested in pieces like this. Dr. Hayes proved to be another pleasant surprise. Unlike the government doctors who occasionally visited the reservation with attitudes of superiority and impatience, Dr. Hayes treated each patient with respect and took time to explain his diagnoses and treatments in clear, simple language. When he examined Sarah, Dr. Hayes confirmed that she had fully recovered from her fever, but he also noticed that she had been anemic, which had made the illness worse than it should have been. He gave her iron supplements and nutritional advice that would help prevent future problems. "Your husband made the right choices in caring for you," Dr. Hayes told Sarah. "The combination of traditional remedies and modern medicine often works better than either one alone." As the day progressed, Joseph found himself serving as an unofficial coordinator between the Apache families and the two white visitors. He helped translate not just words but cultural expectations and concerns. When elderly Maria Santos was hesitant to let Dr. Hayes examine her arthritic hands, Joseph explained that the doctor respected Apache traditions and just wanted to help reduce her pain. Thomas had brought something else that excited the community even more than medical care or supplies. He had contacts with art dealers and trading posts in Denver, Phoenix, and even as far away as New York City who were interested in authentic Native American artwork. "There's a growing market for high-quality Native American crafts," Thomas explained to the gathered families. "People back east are starting to appreciate the skill and artistry involved in traditional work. They're willing to pay fair prices for authentic pieces." Joseph had brought examples of his own wood carvings, including animal figures and decorative boxes with intricate geometric patterns. Thomas examined each piece carefully, asking about the types of wood used and the meanings behind various design elements. "These could easily sell for $10 to $20 each in Denver," Thomas said, causing excited murmurs throughout the group. Most of the families had never imagined their traditional crafts could be worth so much money to outside buyers. "But how would we get them to the buyers?" asked Robert Two Hawks. "And how do we know we'll get fair prices?" Thomas had thought about these practical concerns. "I'd like to propose a partnership. I'll handle the transportation and sales, taking a small percentage to cover expenses and my time. The rest goes directly to the artists. We'll keep careful records of every transaction, and Joseph here can verify that everyone gets paid fairly." Joseph felt a surge of pride at being trusted with such an important responsibility. Thomas was essentially asking him to serve as the community's representative in this new business arrangement. Over the next few days, word of the craft-selling opportunity spread beyond just the families Joseph had originally contacted. Artists from across the reservation brought examples of their work: pottery, beadwork, woven baskets, silver jewelry, and wooden carvings. Thomas examined each piece with the eye of someone who understood both artistic quality and market demands. "The key is to maintain the authentic traditional styles while ensuring the quality is consistently high," Thomas explained. "Buyers want pieces that tell a story, that connect them to Apache culture and history." Sarah, feeling much stronger now, brought out some of her finest weaving work. Thomas was particularly impressed with a blanket that incorporated traditional Apache symbols with an innovative color pattern. "This is exactly the kind of piece that would appeal to collectors," he said. "The traditional techniques combined with your own artistic vision, that's what makes it special and valuable." But Thomas's impact went beyond just economic opportunities. His respectful treatment of Apache people and his genuine interest in their culture began to change how some community members saw themselves and their traditions. For years, government officials and missionaries had told Apache families that their old ways were backward and worthless. Children were often discouraged from learning traditional crafts or stories, being told instead to focus on becoming more like white Americans. Thomas's enthusiasm for Apache artistry and culture sent a different message entirely. "Your traditions have real value," he told a group of young people who had gathered to watch the adults display their artwork. "These skills your grandparents are teaching you, they're not just old-fashioned hobbies. They're part of a rich cultural heritage that the whole world is beginning to appreciate." Daniel Running Bear listened with wide eyes as Thomas encouraged him to continue learning carving techniques from his father. "Master these traditional methods first," Thomas advised. "Then you can develop your own style. But never forget that you're carrying on something that's been passed down for generations." The impact on the children was particularly noticeable. Mary began asking her mother to teach her more complex weaving patterns, and several other young people started paying closer attention, when their elders told traditional stories or demonstrated old skills. Dr. Hayes, meanwhile, had been quietly revolutionizing healthcare on the reservation. Unlike previous visiting doctors who had rushed through examinations and left as quickly as possible, Dr. Hayes took time to understand each patient's full situation. He worked with the tribal medicine woman, respectfully learning about traditional remedies and finding ways to combine them with modern treatments. Many of your traditional medicines are actually very effective, he explained to the community. Willow bark for pain relief, sage for respiratory problems, various herbs for digestive issues. Modern science is proving that your ancestors knew what they were doing. This validation of traditional knowledge had a profound effect on the older members of the community. For too long, they had been made to feel that their wisdom was worthless in the modern world. Now a respected white doctor was telling them that their knowledge was valuable and scientifically sound. As Thomas prepared for another departure, this time to establish the sales network for Apache crafts, Joseph realized that their chance meeting in the trading post had sparked something much larger than anyone had expected. What had started as a simple act of kindness during a harsh winter was growing into a movement that could change the economic and cultural future of the entire reservation. "I'll be back in 6 weeks," Thomas promised. "By then I should have firm orders from buyers and a clear idea of what kinds of pieces sell best. We can start regular shipments and really build this into something sustainable." Samuel White Crow, who had been quietly observing all the changes, approached Joseph as the wagons were being loaded for departure. "That white preacher," he said thoughtfully, "he sees us the way we used to see ourselves, before the government schools and the missionaries told us we were wrong about everything." Joseph understood exactly what the old man meant. Thomas looked at Apache people and saw artists, skilled craftsmen, knowledgeable traditional healers, and intelligent community members. He didn't see problems to be solved or people who needed to be changed into something else. "Maybe," Samuel continued, "this is how things were meant to be. Different peoples learning from each other, trading fairly, respecting each other's gifts." As Thomas's wagon disappeared once again into the distance, Joseph felt that he was witnessing the beginning of a new chapter in the relationship between Apache and white communities. It wouldn't solve all the problems or eliminate all the prejudice, but it was a start. And sometimes, Joseph reflected, the most important changes begin with just one person deciding to treat another person with genuine respect and kindness. 6 weeks later, when the spring snow was beginning to melt and the first green shoots were appearing on the desert plants, Thomas returned with news that exceeded everyone's expectations. The Apache crafts had been received with tremendous enthusiasm in Denver, Phoenix, and other cities. Orders were pouring in, and several gallery owners wanted to establish ongoing relationships with the reservation artists. "We sold everything within 2 weeks," Thomas announced to the gathered community. "And I have orders for 50 more pieces of various types. The buyers are particularly interested in the story behind each piece, who made it, what the designs mean, how long it took to create." Joseph felt a mixture of pride and disbelief as Thomas handed him a leather pouch filled with more money than the community had seen in years. The amounts earned by individual artists ranged from $15 to $40 per piece, representing weeks or even months of income by reservation standards. Sarah had earned $35 for her innovative blanket, more money than the family usually saw in half a year. "I can hardly believe it," she said, holding the bills with trembling hands. "People in faraway cities really want to buy my weaving." "They don't just want to buy it," Thomas assured her. "They treasure it. The woman who bought your blanket told me it was the most beautiful piece of Native American art she'd ever owned. She's planning to display it in her home like a painting." The economic impact was immediate and transformative. Families that had been struggling to buy basic necessities suddenly had enough money to purchase warm clothes for their children, repair their homes, and buy better tools for their crafts. But the psychological impact was even more significant. For the first time in years, Apache artisans felt that their traditional skills had real value in the wider world. Young people who had been losing interest in learning from their elders suddenly wanted to master techniques that could provide substantial income for their families. Daniel Running Bear begged his father to teach him advanced carving methods, and Mary pestered her mother for daily weaving lessons. Across the reservation, traditional knowledge was being passed from generation to generation with renewed enthusiasm and purpose. Dr. Hayes had also kept his promise to return, this time bringing medical supplies that he sold to the reservation at cost, eliminating the need for families to make expensive trips to distant towns for basic healthcare needs. He had also trained several community members in first aid and basic medical care, creating a network of health resources that hadn't existed before. The changes here have been remarkable, Dr. Hayes told Thomas as they observed children playing games that combined traditional Apache activities with new ones they had invented. I've never seen a community transform so quickly from despair to hope. Thomas had brought something else on this visit that surprised everyone: visitors. 3 well-dressed couples from Denver had come to see the reservation firsthand and meet the artists whose work they had been buying. Initially, many Apache families were nervous about entertaining wealthy white tourists, but Thomas had carefully prepared both groups for the interaction. These people aren't here to gawk or judge, he explained to the community. They're here because they genuinely respect Apache culture and want to understand the stories behind the art they're collecting. The visitors proved to be respectful and genuinely interested in learning. They asked thoughtful questions about traditional techniques, listened carefully to explanations of symbolic meanings in various designs, and showed appropriate appreciation for the skill involved in creating each piece. One of the women, Mrs. Eleanor Patterson from Denver, was particularly moved by watching Sarah demonstrate her weaving techniques. I had no idea how much time and skill went into creating these patterns, she said. In the city, we see the finished product in galleries, but we don't think about the weeks of work and generations of knowledge that went into making it. The visit humanized both groups for each other. The Apache families realized that not all wealthy white people were arrogant or dismissive of their culture, while the visitors gained a deeper understanding of the lives and struggles of the people whose art they collected. Mrs. Patterson was so impressed that she commissioned a large ceremonial blanket from Sarah, offering to pay twice the usual price because of the additional time and materials required. Other visitors placed similar custom orders, ensuring steady income for several families through the summer months. As the day ended and the visitors prepared to return to their comfortable hotel in Flagstaff, Joseph reflected on how dramatically his world had changed since that cold December morning when he had met Thomas in the trading post. The reservation was still poor, and Apache people still faced discrimination and challenges, but something fundamental had shifted. You know what's different now? Sarah said that evening as they counted the money earned from craft sales and watched their children play with new toys they had been able to afford. We're not just surviving anymore. We're building something for the future. Thomas had announced that he planned to make the Apache reservation a regular stop on his travels, returning every few months to coordinate craft sales, bring medical supplies, and maintain the relationships that had developed. He had also connected the community with other resources, including a teacher who was interested in starting a school that would combine traditional Apache education with reading, writing, and arithmetic. The goal isn't to change who you are, Thomas had explained. The goal is to help you succeed in the modern world while keeping your culture and tradition strong. Joseph had been elected by the community to serve as the official coordinator of the craft business, a role that gave him new respect and responsibility. He was learning to read and write better, so he could keep accurate business records and correspond with buyers in distant cities. But perhaps the most important change was in how the community saw itself. No longer were they just recipients of government charity or objects of missionary concern. They were business partners, respected artists, and valued members of a larger economic network. Young Daniel had carved a small wooden eagle as a gift for Thomas, working for weeks to get every feather detail perfect. When he presented it to the preacher, his chest swelled with pride as Thomas praised the craftsmanship and promised to treasure it always. "Will you teach other people about us?" Daniel asked. "Will you tell them that Apache people make beautiful things and know important stories?" "I will," Thomas promised solemnly. "I'll tell them that I've met some of the finest people in the world right here on this reservation, and that anyone who gets to know Apache families like yours is lucky indeed." As Thomas prepared for another departure, the entire community gathered to see him off. It had become a tradition, these farewell gatherings, and Thomas had begun to feel like family, rather than just a helpful stranger. "Next time I come," he announced, "I want to bring a photographer. The buyers back east are fascinated by the stories behind your art, and I think seeing pictures of the artists and their families would help them understand even better what they're purchasing." Samuel White Crow, now serving as an informal elder advisor to the craft cooperative, approached Thomas with a final gift, a small medicine bag made from soft leather and decorated with traditional beadwork. "This is for protection during your travels," the old man explained, "and to remind you that you will always have a family here among the Apache people." Thomas accepted the gift with visible emotion, understanding the honor being bestowed on him. In Apache tradition, such gifts were reserved for family members or individuals who had earned permanent places in the community through their actions and character. As the wagon wheels began to turn and Thomas started another journey, Joseph stood with his arm around Sarah's shoulders, watching their friend disappear into the distance. The snow was almost gone now, and wildflowers were beginning to bloom across the desert landscape. "In the dead of winter," Sarah said softly, "when everything seemed hopeless, a stranger came to us with mercy and kindness, and that fire of mercy melted all the ice between us." Joseph nodded, thinking about how one man's simple decision to treat Apache people with respect and compassion had transformed not just their family, but their entire community. Sometimes he realized the most powerful changes begin with the smallest acts of human kindness, performed by ordinary people who simply choose to see the humanity in others. The future was still uncertain, and challenges remained, but the Running Bear family and their community faced that future with hope, dignity, and the knowledge that somewhere in the world, there were people who valued them for exactly who they were.